Hello students, how's everyone doing? Today we're going to be going over lesson 6.7, building quadratic functions to describe situations, part 3. Today's learning goals are I can choose a domain. So domain is one of the main topics for today that makes sense in a revenue situation. I can model revenue with quadratic functions. We're going to be talking about quadratic functions and their graphs. And also, I can relate the vertex of a graph and the zeros of a function to a revenue situation. So these are the main ideas for today. Domain, quadratic functions, and their graphs, the vertex, and the zeros. Okay, so your first assignment is to look at these 4 graphs. Which one doesn't belong? You have a couple of seconds. Go ahead and try to do that now. All right, so now that you guys had a chance to talk about which one didn't belong and why, let's go over this. The first one doesn't belong. A doesn't belong because it is the only graph where the y values don't change. So here, the y value is always 2 because it's a straight horizontal line. B doesn't belong because it's the only graph where the y value increases by a constant rate. Since this is a linear function, the graph is increasing at a linear or a constant rate, meaning it's increasing by the same amount every single time. That is your slope. The third C doesn't belong because it is the only graph that is not continuous. So this graph is discrete, meaning it is not connected with a line. So it's just a bunch of points that make the graph. And finally, D, it does not belong because it's the only graph that does not intersect the y-axis at 2. So here there's an intersection at 2. Here there's a y intersection at y equals 2. Here's an intersection at y equals 2. And this one, as you can see, does not cross or does not intersect y equals 2. Okay, your first activity says a company that sells movies online is deciding how much to charge customers to download a new movie. Based on data from previous sales, the company predicts that they charge X dollars for each download. Then the number of downloads in thousands is 18 minus X. So this 18 minus X is basically what they're going to be using to know how much you're going to charge for each download. Okay, so what you guys are going to do right now is it says complete the table to show the predicted number of downloads at each listed price, then find the revenue at each price. The first row has been completed for you. So here it says when the price is $3, the number of downloads in thousands will be 15, and then the revenue in thousands of dollars will be 45. I want you all to fill in these 2 boxes on your own now. Go. All right, so now that you guys had a chance to fill in these 2 boxes, let's go ahead and work this out together. So if they're telling us that the prediction for the charge in dollars for the number of downloads is 18 minus X, this basically number of downloads is this equation here. So here we're gonna have 18 minus X, and the price in dollars is basically our X. So if we know that the price is $3, then 18 minus 3 is equal to 15. Now, in order for us to be able to know what this is, since 5 is X, then it'll be 18 minus 5. And what we get here is we would get 13. Now, the question is, how do we get 45 here? Well, we can see that if the price of dollars is 15 and the number of downloads in 3 and the number of downloads is 15, then if we were to multiply these 2 terms here, the price and the number of downloads, 3 times 15 will give us 45. So if you have a price of $5 per download and there has been 13,000 downloads, if we were to multiply these, we would get a total of 65 thousands of dollars in revenue. And revenue just means how much money they're generating. So I'm not going to have you guys fill out the rest, but basically we continue following this expression, 18 minus 10, and we end up getting 8 And if we multiply 10 times 8, we would get 80. 12, so we get 18 minus 12, and we get 6. 12 times 6 is 72. 18 minus 15 is equal to 3. 5 times 3 is 45. 18 minus 18 is equal to 0, and then 18 times 0 is equal to 0. Now, I want you all to try to figure out what would be the number of downloads and the revenue if the price was X dollars per download. Go ahead and do that now. Okay, so now that you had a chance to do this, if you just follow this pattern, we can see that we are subtracting 18 minus X. X is the price dollars per download. So that means 18 minus all of these values. So if we continue, 18 minus, this is our value of X, so we drop it here. And can we subtract 18 minus X? We can't, so we just leave it as 18 minus X. Now, in order for us to be able to get the revenue, we had to multiply the price times the number of downloads. In this case, the price is X. The number of downloads is 18 minus X. So if I were to multiply those two terms together, I would just get X times, parentheses, 18 minus X. Okay, so the next question is asking, is the relationship between the price of the movie and the revenue quadratic? So we've been learning about quadratics, and by now you should already understand that a quadratic, I'm a shorthanded quad, is an equation where the x has a exponent of 2. Now, we've learned about linear functions in the past, and we know that linear functions are where our x value does not have does not have an exponent. It's actually an invisible 1. And then we also have learned exponential functions, and we learned that those equations were always in the form of b to the power of x, where our exponent was an x. So it's asking if this expression here is a quadratic. Now, you can see that whenever we have an x or a number or a variable outside of the parentheses, that will have to be distributed. So if we were to have x times 18 minus x, if we were to distribute this x here and here, we would get 18x, and then a positive times a negative is a negative. X times x is equal to x squared. And because we end up getting an x squared, this expression is a quadratic. So yes, it is a quadratic. And the reason is because our output, x times 18 minus x, will be rewritten as 18x minus x squared, as I showed you here, which is a quadratic expression. All right, so we're going to continue with the same activity, but now they want us to plot. Let me move this out the way. Now they want us to plot the points of the revenue as a function of the price one download in dollars. So basically, they want us to graph the price of dollars per download, meaning this is our X, this is our input, and the revenue in thousands of dollars. So the revenue, and this is our output. These are our Y values. So the first point would be 3 and 45. So we will write that as 3 comma 45. So then 3 comma 45 would be 1, 2, 3 comma 45, 10, 20, 30, 40, 45. And that is not correct. All right, so nope, that is wrong. Oops, scratch that. So revenue, so then 345 would actually be right here. Okay, and then we would now make a graph 5 comma 65, and then we would have 5 comma 65, and that point will be 5 is here, comma 65, and that point will be here. Okay. The next point would be 10 comma 80. So 10 comma 80. So we go to 10, x equals 10, y equals 80, which is right there. Then we have the next point, 12 comma 72. So 12 comma 72 will be about, so 70 is right here. So 72 will be a bit further. Then 15 comma 43. So 15 comma 43 is about right there. And then finally 18 comma 0, 18 comma 0 is right there. So this was a mistake, sorry. The point is actually this point right there. Okay, so now if we were to graph this, we would get a quadratic similar or in this format. Okay, so we connect, since we know that this is a quadratic creates a parabola, which is a U-like shaped graph, and that's why our graph is in this form. All right, so now that we graphed it, it says, what price would you recommend the company charge for a new movie? So remember that the X values are the prices, the Y values is the revenue, meaning how much money they're gonna get, and they want you to explain your reasoning. So go ahead and take a couple of seconds to think about what price would you recommend the company charge for a new movie. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that you had a chance to input what price, if you look at this graph basically tells you where or how much the price of the movie is going to give you in terms of the revenue. So your recommendation should be basically based on the graph. The largest revenue comes when the price is between 5. So when it's between $5 and $10. And the reason why is because if we look at our Y values at that point, okay, our Y values are basically at their highest point here. See, this is the highest point of the graph. So that means that about this much, this is our vertex. This is the highest point of our graph. So that is about $9. So a good estimate of for how much would give you the most revenue would be if the company charged $9 per download, because that is where our highest point is on our graph. Now we talked a lot about some terms, so let's kind of just go over and review, which you guys should have learned last lessons. So what is the domain of the ticket prices? Well, the domain is basically what X values make this parabola true. So we know that the parabola starts at this point at 0, 0, and it travels up, then it gets to its highest point, then it goes back down, and it hits this point at 18, 0. So the domain is basically all the values of X between 0 and 18. And the way we write that is we say all the values of X between 0 and 18. Okay, that'll be considered your domain. So what are the zeros? Now you have learned that the zeros are basically the points where the graph crosses the x-axis. So these 2 points would be considered your zeros. So the zeros for this problem would be 0 and 18. You can even say x equals 0 and x equals 18, but just to make this quick, the zeros would be at 0 and at 18, basically anywhere where they cross the x-axis. And then finally, what is the vertex? The vertex goes along with kind of what this question was asking. The vertex is the highest point. This point right there is basically the point where the quadratic will change direction. See, the quadratic is going up, 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 all the way to that point, and then it starts going back down, 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 down. So the vertex would be that high point. And the vertex is always written as an x, y point. And in this case, our x value would be 9. And our y value, if we were to kind of look at where it is, it's actually about 81, a little bit above 80. And if you can't see why it's a little bit above 80, there you go. Okay, because you can see that it's sticking up a little bit higher than 80 right there. That'll be considered your vertex. Okay, activity 2, and this is the last activity. You have to do a couple of things. Now, the reason why I went over this in this activity is because that is what you're going to do now. It says, here are 2 sets of descriptions and equations that represent some familiar quadratic functions. The graphs show that what a graphing technology may produce when the equations are graphed. So for each function, this is what they want you to do. Describe the domain. So they want you to tell them what the domain means. And then it says, think about any upper or limit or lower limits for the input, as well as whether the numbers make sense as the input. And then it also says, then describe how the graph would be modified to show the domain that makes sense. So they want you to list out the domain and they want you to explain or describe how the domain makes sense for this scenario. The second thing they want you to do is they want you to identify or estimate the vertex. So we talked about the vertex in the previous problem. The vertex is the highest point. So you have to describe what it is, and then you have to say, or you have to tell them what it is, and then describe what it means. And finally, you have to identify the zeros. So what are the zeros? And then you have to describe what it means. So for the first activity, it says the area of a rectangle. Remember that a rectangle is basically a shape with opposite sides are equal to each other, with the perimeter of 25 meters and a side length of x. So the area is x times parentheses 25 minus 2x over 2. Based off of this graph, you have to now tell us what the domain is. So go ahead and input your answer now for domain. All right, so now that you had a chance to input your domain, the domain is basically where the graph is on the positive y values. So in this case, the domain would be between 0 and this is actually 12.5. So if we're skipping 1 and going to 5, that means this is 2.5, which is halfway of 5. So 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10, 12.5, 15. So that'll be your domain from 0 all the way to 12.5. Now, why do we have less than and not less than or equal to? And the reason why is because it says, since we are talking about area, you cannot have x values where the graph is negative, meaning that this part of the graph here does not work for the situation because you cannot have negative area. So we're only looking at where the graph is on the positive y values. Okay, so our domain is between 0 and 12.5. That's why we write like this. So now go ahead and by yourself identify the vertex. Go ahead and put your answer now. All right, so now that you had a chance to talk about the vertex, remember that the vertex is the highest point. Basically, that point right here is your vertex. So that point is about 6.25, so about right here, 6.25, comma, and if you put 40, you're a little bit off because it doesn't go all the way up to 40. It's a little bit less than 40, and the estimate would be 39.063. If you put about 6 comma less than 40, you got the question right. Now, what does a vertex mean in this situation? The vertex is where the rectangle will have the greatest area. Since that is the highest point of your parabola, because it's the highest point of the parabola, that means that the side length would be 6.5 and the area would, if the side length is 6.5, then that means your area would have its highest area, which is at 39.063. And finally, to finish this off, what are your zeros? Go ahead and put the zeros in your answer now. Okay, so the zeros for this problem would be at 0 and 12.5. And what do these points mean? This is where there is no area because the side length is either 0 or 12.5. So meaning that these points will not allow you to have an area because at that point you have no extra or you don't have the second length of the rectangle. All right, so now that we tried this one, go ahead and do this one on your own. Go ahead and says the number of squares as a function of step number. So the step number and then the number of squares are given by this equation here. Go ahead and look at this graph and write your domain now. All right, so now that you have your domain, the domain for this problem will be n is greater than 0. And the reason why it's n is greater than 0 is because the negative x values cannot be negative because you can't have negative step values. So remember when we had problems with shapes, we always start off with like step 0, step 1, step 2, and it's like a square, then another square, and then another square, and they're building and they're building. Well, if this is step 0, and then this is an S, and this is step 1, and this is step 2, there is no steps going backwards, meaning that this part of the graph is not used for this situation. So our domain would be any point at starting at 0 all the way to the right, meaning all of these points are good to go. That's why we have n is greater than or equal to 0. Now, what is the vertex of this? Go ahead and input your answer now. Okay, so now that you had time to talk about or to put your answer for the vertex, go ahead and let's go over it. So the vertex is always the highest or the lowest point. In this case, this would be the lowest point. If you look at our equation, to find the vertex in this situation, we know x is equal to 0. So if n is equal to 0, if I plug in a 0, 0 times 0 is 0, 0 plus 4 is equal to 4, and that's basically our vertex. Our vertex is 0, 4. What does our vertex mean in this situation? The vertex in this situation means it tells us the number of squares in step 0. So basically, what this point will tell us is that in step 0, there's actually going to be four of these squares. So I would like have to put like 3 more. And then we would continue from there. So this is a bad example, but this is just to show you how the steps start evolving with these step numbers. And then finally, what are the zeros? In this situation, the zeros were 0 and 12.5. So what are the zeros here? Go ahead and type in your answer. And so let's go over it now. So now that you had a chance to type in what the zeros are, in this case, there are no zeros. Remember that the zeros are the points where they cross the x-axis. In this case, we have our x-axis, and this graph never touches the x-axis. It's always above the x-axis. Therefore, it has no zeros. So the 3 main points that you guys had to learn today were domain, basically from what point on the x-axis to what point on the x-axis is the graph traveling. The vertex, which is the highest or the lowest point in a parabola, in a quadratic. And finally, the zeros. The zeros are the points where the x crosses, where the graph crosses the x-axis. Okay, so now that you guys completed this, go ahead and go back to Schoology and take your code down. Good job, everyone. Good luck on your code down. If you have any questions, please email your teachers. Have a good day and stay safe. Take care. Bye.